Alright, we're going to be rolling without music for this one because I ended up getting a couple of comments on my Helldivers armor passive tier list where I didn't really explain that well why things were in the places they were that well. I just kind of was fiddly making the tier list as I ended up going through it all. So, this video aims to actually give explanations, good explanations, as to why each passive is in the tier list that they are. And if you need a reminder, here's the tier list. I know, I know this doesn't look that good, but I'm hoping with this video that I can explain every single one, starting from desperate measures, conditional use only, borderline effective, all around good, and then finally super earth approved. Of course, some of these are very obvious, others are very much not. So we are going to be going from the bottom all the way to up. All right, advanced filtration and desperate measures. No world are you going to try and use gas armor for a practical use. Unless you are using an incredibly gas oriented, not even build, if your entire team was gas oriented, that is the only reason I would expect you to wear gas armor. Other than that, it is completely worthless, and you're better off choosing any of the other passives in the game. Integrated explosives. This is a passive that is available in the Servants of Freedom War bonds, and it is only available to light and medium armors. The reason I put this in the condition of C tier at this point is this thing is not good if you aren't consistently dying. And even with the explosion being basically the exact same explosion as a thermite grenade, unless you end up getting rammed by a charger or die to the saw of a Hulk, you are never going to see use out of this passive. So it's better to recommend that you bring something that could actually be considered practical. Because if you're dying that much, just increase your survivability. Don't try and suicide bomb. Electrical conduit. This one is actually, this is the only one that I feel like could be swapped around in a bunch of different places in conditional use, so I just kind of settled for the middle. This thing is practically worthless on the bug and bot front and is mildly good on the illuminate front because of how many ways they end up doing electrical damage. If your entire team is doing electrical damage and you are on the illuminate side, that is the only time I can actually like recommend electric conduit over some of the other stuff, and like conditional and maybe even borderline. So, unflinching. This passive kind of sucks, to be quite fair. It honestly is not that good. And the reason is that it's not on heavy armor. With this not being on heavy armor, the only two practical sets that end up making sense on unflinching is the Bloodhound and the Doubt Killer, one of which is in the Superstore and incredibly overpriced. So, you're basically the only good option is the Bloodhound. And I don't need to tell you why using a medium armor with that kind of passive is not great on either of the two factions that end up shooting bullets at you, which is what this passive is supposed to be for. Inflammable. Okay, so inflammable is the high end of conditional use only. I have actually debated whether I wanted to put it in the high end of conditional use or the low end of borderline effective, because this thing is all right. Like, I can see the reason why you would want to use this, considering that there is so many more flame divers than there are electrical divers or gas divers. So it makes sense that I can see somebody using an inflammable armor, and this also ends up coming in every single armor type. So there goes that thing. And this thing is also ridiculously good when using the double-edged sickle. This thing basically negates all of the double-edged sickle's downsides when you end up putting it together with the salamander. And that is the only reason I could see you using inflammable if you were a flame diver or using the double-edged sickle. Servo assisted. I actually, if you remember the previous, um, if you remember the previous one, I actually ended up putting servo assisted in conditional use only, or did I? I don't really remember. I'll have to check on that. Um, servo assisted is really good for the divers that are consistently using stratagems every single second. And these guys are always surprisingly making the best out of the passive that they ended up getting given, because the problem with the servo assisted is that once you end up starting to use it and the muscle memory gets into your head with the increased throwing speed for grenades and stratagem bulbs, then you can't really move off of it. It takes like levels upon levels for you to remove that muscle memory from your head. And that is a problem because throwing distance isn't actually that good unless you're trying to snipe like a factory or a bug hole with a grenade, or there's like 100 or so enemies in one of these like ditches that are on like the bug side. So, and that situation doesn't come as much as you think it would. Scout armor and borderline effective. I think that the scout armor, as advertised as the stealthiest thing you could possibly do in this game, it isn't that great at it. Now, I know a lot of people are going to bash at me for saying that the scout armor should absolutely be higher. It should be an A or should even be an S. Pinging stuff on the map is not that great when you're not even looking at the map. Like 90% of divers do not look at the map religiously. And it gets to the point where having scout armor with another team of basically, if you're not coordinating with a scout armor player, then you're never going to get a good use out of the scout passive. And the detection radius absolutely sucks. It's either bugged or it doesn't even work because enemies will detect you regardless of if you're using scout or not. Acclimated at the top of borderline effective. So acclimated is what I would consider the best out of the elemental resistances, because not only are you going to see a variety of different elemental damage sources on all three of the factions, you're also going to get divers from that are doing those factions that are going to be countering with those exact elemental variants. And having acclimated just as like a precaution, especially if there's a bunch of flame divers on like the bug side or electrical divers on the illuminate side, then it actually makes sense for you to wear acclimated as like a pseudo, okay, I need to be aware of what's going on. Extra padding and all around good. I think that extra padding is the standard for armors, considering it gives you extra 50 armor regardless of which type of armor you're using. And I believe that is good because, well, it's increased survivability and it's something that you could actually look forward to. Um, Democracy Protects is probably one of the most good armors you could have if you're lucky. Now, surviving lethal damage on a coin flip could be really good in certain scenarios. For example, if you had like a portable hell bomb or something that could absolutely annihilate you in one shot, then surviving that coin flip is going to make you feel like an absolute badass. But it's not going to help, for example, if you're swarmed by a bunch of hunters and you need a quick getaway machine for you to be able to survive that kind of situation, which you just don't. And that is where the next passive comes in. Peak Physique. This thing ends up increasing handling on all ranged weapons and also increases melee damage. Now, the big point of this thing is increased melee damage. Now, this thing was just kind of like a joke last time. It ended up getting added into the game when Viper Commandos came out, because it didn't really matter that much about melee because there was no melee weapons in the game at that time. I'm pretty sure the Constitution didn't even get added until like a good 2 months later. So, and then melee weapons themselves didn't even get added until 2 months after that. So it ended up becoming like this huge, like 4 or 5 month time period where Peak Physique did jack shit. But now with Peak Physique doubling melee damage instead of just giving a 1.5 buff, you actually see a lot of divers using this and consistently bringing melee weapons and sometimes the Jar 5 Dominator into loadouts, and they absolutely shred the ever loving out of missions. Fortified! This thing is also one of these standard passives because explosives are the most common element in this entire game. And with a 50% resistance to explosives, then you are going to go around surviving a lot of stuff that would normally kill you if you're using any of the other passives. Um, what I recommend immediately is getting some sort of fortified medium armor. I don't remember what kind of medium armors do fortified. I don't actually think there is one inside the main war bonds. I'll have to check on that. Um, but fortified is going to absolutely save your life more than once. So I ended up putting it on top of all around good. It's an amazing passive, but there is three that I recommend a bit more. Siege ready. Now, this is what we're talking about. This thing gives you extra ammo on everything and also decreases your reload speed on everything. So now you end up getting this to this point where every single one of the stats that are going to increase your survivability and allow you to spray more shit at the enemies ends up getting buffed. And that becomes a really, really good thing to have. And not only is this in light armor variation, so you can just have more ammo for a quick getaway when you end up wanting it, you also get heavy armor, which means defense missions are going to be an absolute cluster with any one of these people being on your team. Um, so you end up getting siege ready with pretty much every single faction because extra bullets and extra reload time is absolutely ridiculous. Medic kit, 2 extra stims, and stims go for a longer duration. That is busted. There is no good way of saying that. Um, Having the thing that ends up basically keeping you alive on any difficulty that's higher than 7 is going to be good in any sort of scenario. And you see that this is basically the meta build. Having like a medium or light armor med kit armor with one of the shields is going to be like one of the best ways you could put your survivability case into any one of the factions, regardless of what they're doing. And of course, the most violent of every single one of the passives, and what I believe to be the best passive in the game, engineering kit. 2 extra grenades and less recoil. Those two stats combined make it so that you can destroy factories and destroy light enemies and destroy a bunch of stuff because you have 2 extra thermite grenades. Those 2 extra thermite grenades is going to be the absolute game changer for you because you can aim that crap at anything and it is going to die. So that was my opinions on every single one of the passives in Helldivers 2. I hope you have a good day, and I'll see you next time. Peace out, everyone.